All right, AMP1 students, in this video we are going to talk about microscopic anatomy of bone. So we are going to focus on 9 and 10, objectives 9 and 10 in this video. So we're going to talk about the types of bone cells. So there, I know this is a picture up in the gross anatomy section, but this is a diagram showing more microscopic anatomy. So I was going to use it as we talk about these various bone cells. So the first cell that I want to let you know about, it's called an osteoprogenitor cell. So it's listed here, osteo for bone and then progenitor. So that means that it's the first cell to produce something. So I'm going to kind of orient you here. We're looking at, in this case, we're looking at the endosteum. So that's that layer that's lining the inside of the medullary cavity. So that's the endosteum. And we're not looking at the periosteum, but realize the periosteum would also have these cells that we're going to talk about in there. So the osteoprogenitor cells. So, but they don't really represent them really well down here. They just call them the cell layer here. But they are also in the periosteum. So little osteoprogenitor cells, our first bone cell that we're going to talk about. You'll find it in the endosteum, and you will find them in the periosteum. And so this is where they're showing an osteoprogenitor cell. So that little cell works similar to our stratum basal cells in our integumentary system. So remember the stratum basal cells that were the deepest layer in our epidermis? What their whole function was just to undergo mitosis and produce a new keratinocyte. So remember when they undergo mitosis, any cell does, it produces two daughter cells that are genetically identical to itself. So when the stratum basal cells do that, they produce a keratinocyte that'll move through the various layers of the epidermis and then eventually slough off. But the other daughter cell that was produced through mitosis stays in that stratum basal layer. So they are the cells, that are allowing for the repair or replacement of that tissue, in that case the integument. So the osteoprogenitor cells are doing that, but they're doing it in our bones. So the osteoprogenitor cells, their role is to undergo mitosis and produce two daughter cells. And one of the daughter cells remains in the endosteum or the periosteum, and the other daughter cell is going to be transformed into an osteoblast. So that's going to be our second type of bone cell that we're going to talk about. So the osteoprogenitor cells are in the endosteum, periosteum, and their role in our bone tissue is to undergo mitosis, so they can produce they can produce osteoblast. So each one will produce an osteoblast whenever it's given that signal to produce an osteoblast. So when it's given that signal to divide by mitosis. All right, so now we have our second cell. So it originated from our osteoprogenitor cells. It's called the osteoblast cell. So they kind of depicted an osteoblast cell here. And so the role of those cells is to form the osteoid. So their role is they're going to produce mainly the organic part of bone. So the organic molecules, and remember collagen is our primary organic molecule in our bone. So our little osteoblast are there to produce the osteoid. And let me see where that term is, because it's a term that we'll need to know. I might have to slide all the way down here. Or actually, I could probably look under osteoblast and it'll say it. Yeah, osteoid. So osteoid, osteoid. And that's essentially the organic molecules that, and again, it's collagen primarily, those fibers. There's other molecules too, but collagen's kind of the primary one. And so that's what the osteoblasts do. They synthesize, that means produce, and then secrete this organic part of bone, which we call the osteoid. So we'll go back to our picture. And so this little osteoblast is going to produce the osteoid around it, again, which is primarily collagen fibers. And so now we know, though, that bone's not made of just collagen fibers. It's also made of mineral salts like calcium and phosphorus. So once that osteoblast is finished making the osteoid, and it makes the osteoid and kind of secretes it where the osteoid sort of surrounds the osteoblast. Then the calcium, phosphate, other minerals, they'll come in from the blood, and what they will do is they will deposit themselves along those collagen fibers. And so then that gives the bone its quality of being hard, because we'll have all those calcified collagen fibers in there. And so then the osteoblast, because it secreted all that osteoid around it, and then the osteoid became, they call it calcified, because it became full of minerals and became hard. Then the little osteoblast is caught or trapped in what it secreted around it. And so it starts to look like these cells. So where this here is representing it started out as the osteoid, and then the calcium and other minerals from the blood came in and deposited along the collagen fibers, and then we got this like really hard, they call it a matrix, this really hard material around the cell. So when the osteoblast is finished producing and secreting its osteoid, and the osteoid gets calcified, it's kind of trapped in that little area, and then it can't really produce anymore. So then what it transforms into is an osteocyte, which is our third type of cell. So essentially, our osteoprogenitor cell it undergoes mitosis, and it'll produce a daughter cell that's going to be an osteoblast. And then the osteoblast, once it's done producing the osteoid, and the osteoid becomes calcified and it becomes trapped, then it transforms into an osteocyte. So these are kind of like the same cells, they're just sort of transforming, and their functions kind of change based on what's going on at that moment. So the little osteocyte is our third cell. So the osteocytes, again, are trapped, call them trapped. They still have connections. You can kind of see the little connections here. So they'll still have connections with the other cells that are around, but they can't really do much. But they do. What they do is they maintain. So they kind of like survey this bone matrix around them, and if there's any injury or stress to it, then they'll send a signal out to the other cells, like an osteoblast or something, and tell them that, we need to, do something. We have some weakness here or stress going on. We need to, you need to do something, because I can't, because I'm kind of trapped here. So the little osteocytes, their function is mainly just like maintaining the already formed, bone matrix that we have here. So that's what they're doing. So our osteoprogenitor cells, they're to undergo mitosis and produce new osteoblasts. And then the osteoblast's purpose is to produce the osteoid, synthesize it, produce it, and then secrete it. But then once it's finished secreting it and then it becomes calcified, then it transforms into an osteocyte. And then the osteocyte's role is just to maintain that bone, kind of, watch for any sort of stress or changes in it, and then send a signal to other cells in the endosteum or periosteum to, do what needs to be done to maintain that normal bone tissue. All right, so those are our first three bone cells: osteoprogenitor cells, osteoblasts, and osteocytes. So we just have one more. And this one I kind of talked about by itself, because it doesn't actually come from this cell line. This is kind of a little cell line here from the osteoprogenitor cells to the osteoblast to the osteocyte. The osteoclast cells actually come from the bone marrow. So remember we said one of the functions of bone is to produce blood cells, and that's true, but the bone marrow also produces these bone cells called osteoclast. And so you can kind of see a big osteoclast here, and it usually has like these little kind of extensions and things that give it more surface area. All right, so we need osteoclast because what they are going to do is break down bone whenever we need it to be broken down. So they'll actually secrete little enzymes that'll kind of break down the collagen, and then little minerals will be released back into the bloodstream. So we need those little osteoclast cells to break down bone for various reasons that we'll get into in more detail later, but we definitely need to have them as well for healthy bone tissue. All right, so let me go back to our objectives. So we talked about the origin and location of the 4 types of bone cells, and we talked about their functions in this video. So the next thing that we'll do, if we have time here, is talk about the composition of bone's matrix. I kind of already did that anyway, so I'm going to slide down here to the bottom. And down here, because I was up there, is where they have the microscopic anatomy. I just didn't like this picture as well, so I wanted to use the picture at the top there. But they do have a picture. But this is where they'll tell you about the osteoprogenitor cells, osteoblast, osteocytes, and osteoclast and their functions. So, and this is the bone matrix. So when we're talking about connective tissue always has cells, and those cells are producing some sort of matrix, some sort of extracellular material. So like for our bone, it would be that organic component, which is called osteoid, but essentially that's a bunch of collagen fibers that those osteoblasts are producing. So that's kind of like the organic component of our bone tissue is the collagen. And then there's some other, like I said, other molecules in there. There's like proteoglycans and glycoproteins, but mainly we just have you remember the collagen. And we talked about, this is one of our questions in lab, we talked about, what's the role that collagen plays in bone tissue, like why do we have it in there? And it's the component that's going to, help with the bone being slightly flexible, so that way it can kind of resist stretching and twisting and, kind of everyday normal activities. So our bones won't be brittle and easy to break. So that's the role of the collagen in there. And then the inorganic portion, that's I think in lab we said mineral salts, and here they say salt crystals, but essentially they're talking about the minerals, primarily calcium and phosphate. And so those are what come along and from the blood and deposit around the collagen fibers in the osteoid. And then once that happens, and those bonds formed, then we'll have this calcified bone tissue, which is what we want. And that all those minerals are very hard, so they allow for the bone to be very rigid and handle a lot of compression forces and things on it. So that's why it's able to support our weight. All right. So I think we just have a little bit in this video. So I will see you in the next video, and we'll talk a little bit more about we're going to get into like how the bone is formed and how it heals and how it remodels too throughout our lives. So I'll see you in the next video.